We're breaking down 5 destinations that Robert Quinn might go next on the Unbearable Sports podcast.
Yeah, she's got some nice long hair, and you know
Welcome
she's a
to the Unbearable Sports podcast. I'm your host, Brad Barron, and welcome in to the 5 teams that Robert Quinn might go to if he were to get traded from the Chicago Bears. Make sure to hit like, make sure to subscribe if you're watching on YouTube, or download the podcast on all podcast listening apps. Just search for Unbearable Sports. And just a fair reminder, if you look down in the description, we are partnering up with the American Diabetes Association. So a portion of what we make from this show is going directly out there. Any merch that you end up buying as well is going there as well. Also, you can look in the description. There's going to be a link. You can donate directly to the Diabetes Association. So thank you all so much if you have donated. It's for a great cause. So thank you all so much. But let's get right into this. So Robert Quinn might get traded. We'll have to see. Maybe he gets traded by the time that this airs, by the time that this goes out. But what do we know so far? So there's been a lot of reports over this offseason that Robert Quinn wants out of Chicago. Now, a lot of us have said, no, who cares about this? And especially when it was coming from Jason La Canfora, who has never gotten anything from the Chicago Bears right. But then all of a sudden, we see Robert Quinn not show up to mandatory OTAs. Now, after he does this, Adam Schefter sends out a tweet and says, hey, the Bears aren't actively shopping. But then some other people are also saying that the Bears are shopping. So we really just have to see, what do the Bears actually want to do? This is just a lot of speculation. This is just a lot of reports that have been going around. But if he's not showing up and if he's not happy, and the reports are he wants to play for a contender, burning the Chicago Bears a little bit there. But if he wants to play for a contender and he doesn't want to be here, I could see the Chicago Bears moving on from Robert Quinn and say, listen, we're trying to build something special here. We're trying to build a good culture. And if you don't want to fit with that, then see you later. The Bears can move on from him and save some cap space. And this year, the Bears already have a whole bunch of cap space this year, so they can eat some of that. And the following year, they already are the number one team in cap space. So if a little bit goes in there too, you're really not losing too much. But Robert Quinn, what we know is he's coming off of his second best season that he's ever had. 18 and a half sacks, absolutely incredible production, breaks the Chicago Bears sack record, which there's a lot of history, a lot of great defensive players, and he was able to do this in the 16 games without Khalil Mack for majority of the season and without Akeem Hicks for majority of the season as well. So it was really him doing a lot of this. So you can't pull the whole, hey, Khalil Mack was there card, because he really produced and really became a leader. So as a Bears fan, I would hate to see him go, but if he wants out, to me, I would let him go then, because like I said, you want to build chemistry, and I would get rid of him. I would trade him right now. So when you go into training camp, you have your guys. But also from the Chicago Bears perspective, there's still a Justin Houston out there that you can pick up who has familiarity inside of this defense, the Matt Eberflus defense, that, yeah, he's not going to be as good as Robert Quinn, but can be at least a rotational piece with your other players that you have out there. I know a lot of people also want the Bears to just wait for the trade deadline. That is still an option. But to me, it's a little bit risky, because you're risking, is he going to still play at the same high level? Also, you're kind of banking that somebody goes down on one of the contenders types of teams and a need pops up, and then you try to get top dollar for him. I'd rather trade him now, get some people, and move on. But other pieces that we know about him too, he's a 32-year-old speed rusher. That's why I'm a little bit nervous, because he heavily leverages his burst. And Father Time is undefeated. Eventually, the speed goes away with age. And that's something that I do get nervous about, because you see all those highlights. He is a speed guy. He wins with his first step. He wins with just beating the person to the outside. And he doesn't have a plethora of moves like some other people do. His one move that he's got is really, really dangerous. He also has 3 years left, so it's a little bit different than Von Miller, and about $18 million per from the Chicago Bears side. Now, if we trade him, a big question is that $18 million for another team? The answer is no. There's some contract negotiations that can go on where the Bears take some of the salary, and it could potentially be down. I saw in the numbers of about $12 million. So it wouldn't just be $18 million per year for the next 3 years, but it is important to note that he does have those 3 years left because that could be really enticing for some teams that might value him over that cap number. But let's finally talk about what are the 5 teams. So I kind of cheated with the first one. I put the Chicago Bears as one of the landing spots. You can sub that out with the Indianapolis Colts because honestly, the Colts could potentially be looking at a player like this because he's a very good fit in an Eberflus Indianapolis Colts style of defense. But I got to throw the Chicago Bears out there because they could just smooth things over with Robert Quinn, and he comes into training camp and he's like, "What are you guys talking about? Everything's totally peachy. Everything's totally fine. You guys made a big deal out of this, media, not me," and potentially come in as a Chicago Bear. That is a possibility. And maybe see some of the stuff out of Justin Fields, and he's like, "Yeah, I'll stick around a little bit longer." But the number two, another landing spot that he could be at is the Kansas City Chiefs. The Kansas City Chiefs have really struggled to find a pass rusher. They don't have the most cap space in the world, but they could definitely move around a couple contracts. And like I said, the Bears can take on some more of that money, and now they can move him to the Kansas City Chiefs. Now, the Kansas City Chiefs, they have D Ford, who is just very underwhelming as a pass rusher, and George Karlaftis, the rookie out of Purdue, that I personally liked, but you're banking on a rookie to really kind of push you from this defensive line perspective. Trading for a Robert Quinn could really, really, really hopefully vault this team into Super Bowl contention because, as we all know, Kansas City Chiefs are always a Super Bowl contender every single year. So I think that the Robert Quinn trade makes a lot of sense if they do want to make this defensive line a lot more formidable. But then number three, I was actually surprised by this because I was looking at different teams, and every time I was searching, the Arizona Cardinals always popped up. And I feel like they don't have a bad edge rushing situation with Golden and JJ Watt, but they are the betting favorites to get Robert Quinn. And a big reason has got to be that Cliff Kingsbury and also their GM might be on, they're definitely on the hot seat, especially Cliff Kingsbury. The GM, maybe they might just want to clean house, even though I kind of like the way that he's building the roster. They're still on the hot seat. They might say, hey, if we don't win right now, we don't know what's going on with Kyler. He wants all this money. It's just going to be an absolute crap show. I could see them trying to say, let's get rid of Marcus Golden can just be the backup and let's have Robert Quinn be that upgrade. They love to blitz. They love to bring the heat, and Robert Quinn brings the heat. 18 and a half sacks. He's got speed, which they have a lot of within Isaiah Simmons, and they have a lot of other big, fast players on that team that I think that he could definitely fit right in and make them really good. So that's why they are also the betting favorite. And what would they potentially have to trade for Robert Quinn? I haven't touched on that yet. Jason La Canfora says that it's going to be more than what a Von Miller deal was. So maybe a one. I think that's very rich. I think I would freak out. I might cry. I might shed a couple tears if the Bears ended up getting a first for him. But he had a lot of great production. If it's a second, I'd even be ecstatic too. I could see it being a third or maybe a 4 and a 6. The value is all over the place because it depends on what you think of Robert Quinn. Some people might think he's aging, so he's just going to fall off. And others might think that, hey, this is how he is. And edge rushers can usually play at a high level for a couple extra years, and the contract should be pretty good if the Bears take on some of that salary cap. But let's get back down to the list. So, the fourth team is the Dallas Cowboys, a homecoming, if you will, for Robert Quinn. I was pleasantly surprised on Twitter. I was looking out there for Robert Quinn stuff. And I was seeing some Dallas Cowboys fans, Dallas Cowboys podcasts saying, hey, let's get Quinn back. Because Quinn found a resurgence for the Dallas Cowboys in that their 4-3 system. So why not bring him back? But also, why didn't they bring him back? If you remember, it was the Atlanta Falcons and the Chicago Bears bidding for him, not the Dallas Cowboys. So I'm curious if they actually do want him back. It's a nice story. It sounds like some fans want him back as well. So I'm all for it if they end up wanting to get rid of him and the Dallas Cowboys can then take him back in. And hopefully he has a little bit more life with the Dallas Cowboys team that it always seems like this is going to be their year. It might just be the fans saying that, but it always seems like they're at least in contention with a Dak Prescott. So this should make that defense just still pretty good for the Dallas Cowboys. And last but not least, another big-time favorite next to the Arizona Cardinals is the Baltimore Ravens. The Baltimore Ravens love to rush the passer. Absolutely love doing it. And right now, they have some good players. They have Tyus Bowser and Odafe Owe on the outside edges. So Owe's going into his second year. Tyus Bowser's been just a solid edge rusher. They really don't have that next level type of edge rusher like what a Robert Quinn would bring. So Robert Quinn, a lot of people are saying this might be the spot that they want to try and trade for and try and upgrade that pass rush because that's how this Ravens defense really dominates is with this edge rush. But on the flip side too, they get production out of any edge rusher that they have for some reason. That it's just the scheme, the way that they scheme it up, it's just incredible. So that's why I don't necessarily believe that he's going to be over there, but it is something to be on the lookout for. Ravens as that last option. A couple other teams that I just didn't really mention out here as well. One is also the Cincinnati Bengals because on the other side, they have Sam Hubbard. So you could definitely upgrade Sam Hubbard and just say, hey, we're going to bring in Robert Quinn. Only thing that I don't love, seems like Hendrickson does play on Robert Quinn's side a lot, and Quinn definitely plays on one side predominantly, on over the left tackle. So maybe that's something where they're like, hey, we're not going to do that. But it's still a spot and a potential contender that they might want to just upgrade that position. So that about does it for the Robert Quinn special. Where exactly is he going to go? Let me know down in the comments. Do you think that the Chicago Bears are going to hold on to him? Do you think that they're going to keep him, trade him? And what do you think that they could get for him as well? Thank you all so much. Make sure to like and subscribe. And Unbearable Sports Podcast, we're out.
Yeah, she's got some nice long hair, and you know that she's a bad chick.
Thank you for listening to this Belly Up Sports Podcast Network product. Some said we go belly up, so we made it our name, and we're still here.